So yeah, what I find amazing is that at the bottom of the ocean there is so much fish there that we have no idea. Like you see, like on the programs, like 15,000 fish just swarm together, and they're all going in the same direction. They never hit each other. They seem to just be all in sync. It's like having cyclists on the Tour de France, all along each other, and they all know where to turn. But as you know, one person crashes, they all fucking crash. Clearly, fish have better agility than like the Tour de France people. But you look at birds and you see like they're all flying, and when one goes, they all go. And it's interesting because if you look at how they fly, they always follow the one in front. And as long as the one in front always follows the one in front, they will never crash. Hence why they're always at a V. Hence why soldiers in the military kind of have the same, like, you know, alignment. But it's interesting, isn't it?
The flying V, yeah. I mean, it also is the fact that it seems like, from what we can tell, it's effortless, right? It's almost as if they have a automatic superpower, I guess, or it's just, you know, we like to think just because we're at the top of the food chain, we're the most impressive creature on the planet. When meanwhile, there's all these other things out there that just do crazy stuff with no explanation. It often reminds me of like the way they used to portray, like, you know, in Disney cartoons, like whenever Donald would try to steal the honey from a beehive and the bees would all become different shapes. And like sometimes it would be they're chasing him just as a swarm, and he would like, maybe he would do something like he'd put an arrow up, like, you know, I went this way, and the bees would stop, become a question mark, look at the thing again, and then become an arrow and go follow him. And, you know, it seems something like that was just funny and like colorful shapes on the screen for kids, but then you go and see that in real life, so stuff is happening like that. Like swarms of birds are flying in a cloud, and it's like, how is that work? How is that happening? We can't do that as people. So, you know, every once in a while we should probably try to take a cue from nature and see if we could figure out how that's happening, because, you know, they do it without even wasting energy thinking about it, whereas we fight about everything. We argue at the first chance we get.
Yeah, it's amazing because we think we are the most intelligent species because we can build houses and other animals can't build houses. But when you watch like how a bird picks up a bit of grass or a twig, takes it back to the nest, and how the nest is all compact together and all the sticks are interlinked, so it's all like solid. And how does a bird's nest stay in a tree on a windy day? It's because it's all like proper locked in together. So you think about intelligence, there's not just like one form of intelligence, like can you do this or do that? You look at the birds and they have this way of knitting nests together. And you look at, for example, I saw a chimp video on YouTube. This monkey was here and this monkey was here, and he just suddenly went, and the other guy went like that and moved out the way. And then he started to like grab something and he whacked his arm down, and he knew that he shouldn't be doing that. And I'm looking at these chimps and they just seemed like human beings, like just having fun. And then he picked his nose and flicked it on him, and he went, and he put it back on him, and it's like, wow, that is intelligence. We think we're the smartest, but you look at animals and like the squirrels and how it's just everything in nature is a reflection of human, but yet we think we're the smartest. But intelligence, there's different dimensions of it. Just because they're not doing that, it doesn't mean anything, because their survival is different to our survival. They only need to do what they need to do to survive. And you study a bird and how it flies back. I've got a little bird's nest, and I'm looking at the bird before it goes in the hole. He's looking around to see if there's any other animals or humans that have seen him go in, because then they might come and take the eggs at a later date. And he's looking around. Last night, I picked up a frog. I put him on my hand. As I turned my hand, the frog was turning with me. So as I turned left, the frog was doing that. And as I turned right, almost like a compass. When I move that way, it goes that way. And I'm thinking, okay, his eyes are really big and 3D-like. Is it just me thinking he's looking? But no, his head was turning as I was turning him. And I was like, fuck, that's amazing. Because it means that he knows that I'm looking at him.
Yeah, they have personality. You know, the probably the people who know this the best are do you have any pets? Do you have any animals that you keep?
Jack Russell.
Yeah. So now when you talk to your dog, you know, he's just seeing this bigger creature, and he's just here from what we know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it sounds like to be a dog, but I imagine it's the same way their barking sounds to us, right? It's just a bunch of noise with some structure. There's some repetition of some of the sounds, but for the most part, we don't know how to interpret it. But every once in a while, while, you'll notice when you're speaking to your pets, they'll kind of like, cock their head a little bit, like almost as if they're responding to what you're saying, or they're picking up. There is some kind of universality, I think, to emotion and to sort of basic life functions. Like every creature knows what hunger feels like. Every creature knows what fear feels like. Every creature knows what attraction feels like. So that the fact that we don't have the same language patterns to be able to directly speak to us, I think for a long time, or speak to each other for a long time, we've taken that as the sort of sign of intelligence, right? And so I think this is where you could get into, I don't want to say controversy, but you could start getting into strange ways of thinking and start saying, well, if there are these universalities, even though there's these different forms of communication, does that speak to a higher organization? Like, are we in the Matrix and everybody's just following some of the same, like there's certain parts of the program that's the same for everybody. Everything feels pain, everything feels pleasure, everything feels fear, everything feels pride, everything feels love, everything feels hate. Those are kind of just, these are going to be out there, and no matter what kind of creature you come into this game as, you could wind up respawning later as a totally different creature, but you'll still feel some of these basics that every living thing feels. And that starts to kind of lead to, man, if we ever really get answers to some of these questions, are we going to be able to handle it? You know what I mean? What did this to us? How is this where we are? And how is this how it works?
Yeah, like language is just it's just different frequencies that your body recognizes over time as an action. So hunger, you have the word hungry, but that feels what it feels like to be hungry. And any animal can connect to that feeling of hunger. And in India, it may sound a different language, in Chinese, different language, but it all goes back to the same thing. And like when I say like the word sausage to my dog, her head turns. But when I say the word like dinosaur, nothing. So
right.
the sound frequency connects to her and creates like an emotion and a feeling based on when she last had a sausage. So when she like hears the word sausage, she remembers how juicy that tasted, made her feel good, and it like puts her back to that mindset of when she had a sausage, and it's like, did you say sausage? Like, yeah. It's amazing. And like I think about animals, and you see like a gazelle, for example, getting taken down by a lion, and that lion's gnawing on that gazelle's leg, the bare flesh, and I'm like, well, we know what pain is based on how we think what pain is, like it hurts. But when you look at other animals and you see that animals get eaten by the predator, do they have the same pain feeling as us? Is pain in our head? For example, if you hypnotize somebody and then you put like a pin through the arm, like David Blaine did this thing where I think it was Ricky Gervais, where he put this sharp stick through his arm, and he managed to not react in any way. And so through hypnosis, you can train yourself to not, respond to pain, and it's pain in their head based on a past situation. Then you look at animals and how they get taken down, they like fall, and you think, wow, if I fell like that, I'd fucking hurt myself. Like when you see a dog running to a ball and it flips over the ball like on YouTube, it lands in its back. Yeah. I'm like, if I did that, that'd really hurt. But is he feeling the same pain as me? Is there such thing as a universal pain? Is it circumstantial? Does your nervous system depend on how you respond to pain? You see a fish getting eaten by a fish. Did you feel anything? How long does it take, for example, when ISIS cut your head, for your nervous system to be destroyed so you don't feel the rest of your neck being cut? So is pain is it universal, or is it circumstantial, or is it based on patterns of the past of remembering what it was like to feel pain?
I mean, it's funny because probably for the most part, unless you are going to be putting yourself into a situation where you're going to be in a wild habitat and there's a potential you'll be eaten by a creature bigger than you, there's a good chance going through our lives that we're never going to know the fear of, okay, if you don't move right now, this thing is going to eat you. Like literally, you're going to be eaten. There's not going to be anything left of you. But animals who obviously have not been eaten yet, they know, just from the predator being around, like, whoa, this is what I have been trained as the thing to be afraid of the most. And it almost is instinctual at that point. But we probably wouldn't know that same level of fear. But if, let's say, you live in a city and you've survived being mugged, or you've survived any kind of a violent encounter, you have this new layer of awareness, right? That probably makes it so when you enter crowded areas, you might be looking for exits sooner. When you kind of go into new places, the first thing you want to know is, where is the place that I'm going to be the most secure? How does that door open? Where does it lead? And it's sort of, it's the fact that we have these kind of abilities. I remember I was actually listening to a psychologist when I was at my previous job, and they were kind of talking to the corporate world and trying to explain how we can't always just be everything by the numbers. Like we got to remember that we're all people dealing with each other, and for animals it's probably slightly different, but and he started to talk about how if we just try to look at things by a formula, but we take out the fact that, like, the person you're dealing with on that day could be it could be the anniversary of something very bad that happened to them, and that could be now affecting every decision they make for that day. It's like we have to acknowledge the fact that there are these other forces that are going to be impeding on what we try to do, either whether it's just going about our day-to-day business or trying to survive walking through the woods. And we have the ability to picture all these different outcomes. We have the ability to imagine things that haven't happened yet, and we make our decisions based on that. It's called metacognition. We can think about thinking, whereas, as far as we can tell, animals don't have that layer. They just have I know if I walk that way, that thing's going to eat me, so I walk over here. But we have this: if I walk that way and this thing bites my leg off, I'm going to not have a leg for the rest of my life. And then if my insurance doesn't cover that, I'm going to be paying all this extra money. Like, we have now all these sort of things that just start extrapolating themselves in our head, and they all exist in this virtual fake possibility of the future, but not the real future yet. And then we make decisions based on that. Animals, from what we can tell, don't do that so far. So I don't know if you want to say that we have the better deal because our brains are more elaborate, and we operate in a virtual space. And we kind of, I mean, if you think about it, the way the whole world interacts, we have things like insurance. We have all these different mechanisms that are all like, back in medieval times, they didn't have that. They just had what they could see: food, water, sleep, fire. This is what we've got. But our brains just kept making everything more complicated. And now it's like, well, I can't drive a car unless I have a program in place that, in case I hit somebody, or in case somebody hits me, there'll be a pile of money that comes from somewhere to guarantee my quality of life. Already, we've taken that to a way beyond just surviving, on the planet. Now we've went and made this thing an actual pain in the ass.
Do you think that if we've all come from a single cell organism and there's just different cells evolved at different speeds? So, for example, if you look at an ape on all four legs, you could say it's similar to a polar bear and a bear similar to a cow, and a cow similar to a donkey, blah, 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 blah. If man has come from a single cell, and, for example, a gazelle or a lion has come from a single cell, does that mean over time their brains will become our brains and be able to think in the ways that we do, where we can think about thoughts before we do it, as opposed to what you said, think, okay, if I go this way, there's going to be food. If I go this way, it's going to eat me. Does everything evolve in the same pattern? Does life always come back around, and the same cycle of life happens over and over and over again, but just in different times? Will that lion be able to think like us and eventually start to go on all twos, but over thousands, millions of years?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the way a lot of insects organize their cultures or societies is very similar to us. They may not build cities, but their colonies underground are very intricate tunnels. I was actually on a recording over the weekend, and one of my colleagues brought up that there are certain places, I think in Europe, where it's almost like the ant colonies connect from one end of a continent to the other, and they actually will have wars the way that we do. Like, giant ant colonies will face off against each other, and there are like areas where the front lines meet, where people will just see like hundreds and hundreds of dead ants everywhere, and it's almost in like a straight line, as if this is the battleground and you just found the two sides coming together. So there probably is a certain amount where we all probably think a lot more similarly than we know. I've always kind of thought that if there was ever a way to do, like, for real, like a Dr. Dolittle type of thing, where someone can actually interpret the sort of sounds or signals that a creature like an animal is giving us and interpret it the way we interpret language, I'm willing to throw some money that it's a better than 50% chance that animals do speak to each other the way we do. We just don't hear it. You know what I mean? And I know it's something that's like funny for a movie, but it would be pretty interesting to hear like a couple bears going like, "Oh yeah, we know you're out there, dudes. We know you're sitting in the woods with guns. We get that." You know, over hundreds of years, we figured out that loud noise and then our friend's head exploding means that there is a creature that has something out there that we don't know how to fight against. But they just don't have the ability to put it into words we can understand. I would love if they could find a way to do that. I think dolphins have been the closest thing, right? We've been able to sort of actually communicate with dolphins. There have been oceanographic institutions where they use different sounds to kind of, you know, speak back and forth, and dolphins kind of use sentence structure. So there's a possibility we're all on the same program. It's just the different frequencies thing.
Yeah, so we all the universal laws are the same for every living thing, a tree, every animal. We all use the same universal law. Energy is the universal law. Energy at a higher pitch is a sound, and that becomes a language. So yeah, everything communicates in their own way, just on their frequency. So you hear a squirrel like go, ee, 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 ee. Well, you could say that that's a high pitch frequency, but if you break it down, there's different layers of like patterns, and to them, they know what that means. The same, like I listen to squirrels when I go on a walk. They're talking to each other. One squirrel says something, there's a gap. That squirrel says something, and then there's a gap, and that squirrel says something. Same for birds. The same for. It's just like if you listen, there's a cheep 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 cheep. They are communicating in some way. We're never going to know what they're saying. For example, there's a guy, run, okay, take cover. We're never going to know. But it's obvious that when you hear these bird sounds and squirrel sounds, that and even when a cow moves in a field, another cow moves. They've said something, and we're never going to know what it is. But it just shows that language is just a form of communication and confirming, are you feeling how I'm feeling? Is it time to migrate? Is it getting a bit cold? Is it time to migrate because I'm feeling horny? Is it time to migrate because I need food? Is it time to migrate because of the fucking guy in the woods with a gun? And exactly. They're saying something, and that sound reflects on a past experience of an action. And so over time, your brain recognizes when that squirrel goes, that it means fuck, there's a guy or a fox. So yeah, there's definitely a universal language that every living thing uses, but it's just on a different frequency. Where unless you have studied those frequencies, you're never going to know what the fuck it is.
Yeah, man, but I think there's going to be a way. We're going to come up with some kind of computer program or an app or something that's going to be able to hear it. And like, kind of like, you ever watch, there's a cartoon that's kind of popular here in the States called Rick and Morty. And it's supposed to be a lampoon of Back to the Future, like Doc and Marty, but it's a little bit skewed where the doctor, Rick, is jaded, cynical, alcoholic. And he creates devices like this. So he created this helmet that when he let the assistant Morty take it for a walk, he's walking and he actually hears the squirrels talking to each other. And they're talking about things like, oh, yes, they followed our plan exactly. Now the world markets are crashing. It's just a few more decades and we'll be able to rise and take over. And then the other one goes, is that kid staring at us? And he goes, oh, man, he can understand what we're saying. Guys, there's somebody who can hear us. And all the squirrels start to like follow this kid as he's walking. And when he gets back to the house, Rick is waiting there and he's like, what the hell's going on? He goes, I don't know, but I think I heard these squirrels talking. He's like, oh, God damn it. Did you listen to the squirrels? All right, we got to go to a new dimension. We're fucked here now. And it's just like every dimension, the squirrels are secretly plotting to overthrow the humans. And once they find out that we can hear them, they have to put their plan into action. I think the reason that is so funny is because we're all sitting around going, that could really be going on for all we know. We just haven't invented the helmet that interprets their frequencies into words we can understand.
Exactly.
And I think that's the other thing that would freak out a lot of the people who, try to claim that animals don't have the same type of emotions or pain. I think there's some elements of the fact that we've been rather cruel to animals over the decades is that there are some people who just write off, well, they can't talk to us, so as far as we know, they're not feeling pain. And what's it called? I think it would be nice to get a confirmation that can't be denied. Something that we could point to and be like, okay, so now you guys got to stop torturing animals because now we have definitive. They've told us it hurts. It hurts to be shot. Okay, it hurts to be tortured.
I always say, for example, if you were to close your eyes and hear somebody meow and there's a cat and it was the same frequency, you wouldn't know the difference. If a cow mooed and it was a person, if it's the same frequency, you wouldn't know the difference. So if you think about it in terms of the animal, if I go past a field full of cows and I moo, he's not going to know whether that came from a human or his mate. But that frequency does have a certain sound, like a feeling, it's an action. For example, I can moo in a field full of cows and some other cow moos and then they all start to moo. So it's almost like if I realised that moo said, right, guys, we need to go to the water fountain. And I did that. And they all started to say, let's go, moo. They start to walk. The same as if I meow at a cat, it meows back at me. And when I stop meowing, it doesn't do anything. So you can actually tune in to the frequencies of a sound which an animal makes, not really know what it means, but communicate to the animal. And over time, if you learn certain sounds and watch the action that happens, so does a squirrel run up the tree? Does the squirrel stare at you? Does another squirrel come? Like when you have a wasp and you feed it food, loads come. You can understand the frequencies and then the action and then start to study. When I make this sound, the cows go there. When I make this sound, the squirrel goes there. And yeah, you can communicate with animals because all it is doing is understanding sounds and then actions. So absolutely. If there's not already, there's apps that will pick up the sounds, store those sounds, and you can like type the action, and then you can almost like put together a sentence where that action becomes action, like sounds. Sign language, you do that means hello, this means how are you, so you put this in order and you get sort of the universal sound language of a squirrel or a dolphin, and you can either make that noise yourself or the app does that noise, and then you can literally communicate like that squirrel is doing to his mate. And we think that's because we don't understand what the squirrel's saying, that they've not studied humans and animals for thousands of years. They know when you make that, that's a fox, or there's an owl or something. Like, I'm sure there is a language that has been going on for thousands of years with every single animal, and yet we don't have a clue, so we think they're dumb. And I think it's just crazy how we think that we're just the smartest. We're not.
And it's funny because the place where stuff like this gets explored the most in pop culture, from what I've been able to sort of pick up, is it's always in the science fiction realm, right? Because they're the ones that are kind of pushing the boundaries and saying, well, what if and what's the future going to be like? And there are a lot of movies where they will create like this little device, right? There one movie in particular. There's this movie called The Last Starfighter. I don't know if it was popular everywhere in the world as it was in the U.S. in the early '80s. But what this guy is about, a kid. They recruit people to be starfighters with this video game that they circulate throughout the galaxy. And when they bring the kid to the space station, he's a kid from the Midwest, the U.S., speaks English, and he's hearing all these different alien languages around him. And then somebody walks up and puts this like pin on his lapel and pushes a button. They're like, this is our universal translator. So now you can speak, they can speak, and everybody hears, like when he speaks English, the aliens will hear their language. And when the aliens speak their language, he hears English. And it was a convenient way to make the movie so everybody spoke English. And they didn't have to learn like in Star Trek where everybody would learn how to speak Klingon or learn how to speak the various fake languages. They just decided, let's do this the easy way. But it was an interesting concept that we would break down, we would stop the inability to communicate. You know what I mean? Like it's interesting that we had different regions of the world create different languages when we're all the same species, right? Like how did one person, one area we decided water is the word water, and another area that decided it was the word low. You know what I mean? And meanwhile we're the same. Why is that? And what we want is a thing to be able to bring all those things back together. It's really kind of neat, and I would hope. I'm surprised we haven't had it yet, but I think I've seen enough commercials from like AT&T and Verizon that say they have apps to do at least the human side of it. So like if you go visit a country you've never been to before, there's probably going to be an app that can listen to somebody speak the language, translate it to English for you, or whatever your native language is. Then you speak into the app, and it'll translate it back to them, and you at least can use your phone to get by when you're traveling in a country where you don't speak the language, which to me was always a thing that I felt like if you're going to prep for a trip to someplace else, you should learn the basics of the language. So we've at least taken that lead time out where you don't need to spend like years becoming fluent in a language to go visit another country. But I always thought that was sort of like a basic. Don't you need that? You need the basics of communication. You need to be able to communicate. Your at least your base needs. And we've always, as humans, have that ability to pantomime, and people have been able to make do. I mean, we had to get through this situation way before the age of apps and smartphones, but it's funny that we still have those barriers and that there will always be new barriers once we conquer those barriers. But communication's key.
What I find fascinating is there's like different fields around the world, different grass. There's not just one universal grass. Spanish grass is different to English grass. And then the cow in Spain moves different to the cow in England. They also look different. The meat tastes different. You look at ants in Spain. They're big. They look different. In England, they are tiny. You go to like Africa, they're really big. Humans, you've got black humans, Chinese humans, English humans. And same for trees. What I find so amazing is that everything is like multidimensional around the world. There isn't just one. So the same species of plant, same species of lion, same species of human. But when you break it down, our cells are not the same. Our biology isn't the same. Our vibration isn't the same. So somewhere along the line, before we had like planes and cars and transports and boats thousands of years ago, you'd have a pack of animals or humans over here and here. They're just on a different part of the rock. Like there's a tree here and a tree there. They were drinking water and it felt nice. So they would have gone, roti. And somebody else over there would have drunk water and would have gone, water. And it just would have been like a feeling of like, like water or fruno. And then suddenly that other animal remembers that fruno means water. And that becomes like the universal, or the not universal, that becomes their sign for water or let's migrate. And it's only because of like transport and migration and interlinking countries and tribes that we're now sharing language, which is the same feeling, but a different language. And isn't it amazing how someone who doesn't understand Chinese and someone who's Indian who doesn't understand Indian, they do not have a fucking clue what you're saying, but yet what they're saying is the exact same thing. Feeling of love, harmony. I need to take a shit. I need to go to school. Shit, I didn't let the dog out. Fuck, I dropped my drink. It's the same feelings, but in a different language. And it's fascinating how you don't understand at all, but it's the same thing. And like, you know, Google Translate apps, you can say it and they understand it immediately. But you're looking at a human who's the same as you, different color, but yet they don't understand. But yet they do understand it. That really fascinates me.
Yeah. Well, that like you could have those shared moments. Like they might not speak the same language, but if somebody sees somebody else in pain and just with their eyes, like kind of empathizes with them, and that other person just seeing that someone else notices they're in pain, and then they feel a little bit relieved of that pain, or at least like made to feel a little bit more comforted just by knowing they're not alone. You know, we have that social aspect to us as humans where it's like being in community with other people makes dealing with pain easier. So as much as there is that the barrier of the languages, there's stuff that is universal that I think there's a certain thing, an argument to be said that we have something like we have another sense that we don't really know how to define. And it's just the sort of the ability to intuit, you know, to empathize. You know, there are some people who have it like in droves, you know, people who are really overloaded with that ability, and they are actually called empaths. Those are the people who can walk into a room and be like, that person over there is dealing with something really, really, really intense because I could just feel the pain that they're feeling. They're emitting it into the world almost. You know, there are people who can read auras or could just sense what you're going through just from being near you. So there's something to the universality beyond the language aspect. And I think language is kind of like pencil and paper, right? You know, we had to have something to be able to represent our thoughts. We had to have some way to get the thought from here and express it to somebody else. And it started out as cave paintings and grunts, and now we've got apps and texts and speeches and music and poetry. But there's still, if we didn't have that commonality of like from both knowing what pain feels like, I don't have to know exactly what you're going through, but if I see you from across the room and I see that you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. I can at least know what that has felt like and know that you must be going through something hard. And even if it's, I just smile at you, it might help. Or if I just wave, or that's where you're someone just putting their hand on your shoulder, or when they say, you need a hug. It's those kind of things. And maybe you don't even have to give them that hug, but just knowing, like noticing them from across the room is the same thing. It's kind of neat. And that's why I think that always all leads up to, all right, who programmed the Matrix? What's going on here? Like these are things. These are every avatar comes with this, and you just get to customize the clothes, like the beginning of a video game, right? Like, all right, I'm gonna add a few more points to this feature. I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna give him a black jacket instead of a blue one, and that's my guy. But everybody always starts with these basics.
Yeah, different levels of intelligence. For example, intelligence is learning from mistakes. So you become smarter when you don't do the thing that wasn't considered smart. So it's about learning from past patterns, whether it was in this existence of life or ancestors. But you look at trees. I found it hard to understand this, but you look at a tree, you don't think of it as alive. You think of it as just, it's not moving, it's not talking. So how can it be alive? Like, how is it intelligent? But if you actually go into the cells, that they're moving just like our cells. And when you think about how a tree knows to move towards light, or if there's another root of another tree which is going to take its nutrients, it knows to go another direction, or it knows to close up when there's going to be a storm or something, like there's a Venus flytrap. You do that and it closes up. You look at plants and they seem to know certain things, like when it's cold, for example, they close up for some reason, and then when it's sunny they open up so they can absorb more light. So you think, okay, well, there is a brain or some sort, maybe not the brain that we think it like ours, but there is an intelligent thing in that plant which has learned from patterns of trees in the past, or it's responding to certain thing. So you think, wow, if we all work on the same law and we are no different to a tree or whatever, then we literally are all the same. So you talk about the Matrix. It's not that there's a man in the sky programming the Matrix. It's just like we are all using the same. We need the same water, same food, the same sun. If we have come from a singular cell organism, you can see it in everything. But when you look deep, when you study anything for long periods of time, like a human, you see, oh wow, he's upset. He's got something going on in his life, and you empathize. But if you just look past everyone and just ignore them, you won't see the similarities of you, like the feeling of pain. You look at a plant, and like when you speed up a plant and like, you time lapse a plant and you see how it responds to it, and like there's a bee that comes along and it opens up and it goes in more color. You think, wow, that plant is just a very smaller version of intelligence of a human. So it makes you think, can a plant become a human just like an ape became a human, or a fly became a duck and whatever? Is it possible? Yeah. Like, can a tree, for example, right, if you think of a walnut, okay, you look at a walnut, that is exactly the same as a brain. Imagine you've got your skull, you've got the bit in the middle, the left part and the right part, okay? You look at a brain, how it's shaped. You look at a walnut, okay? You look at a walnut, you've got the bit in the middle and that bit either side. It's exactly the same as a brain. And if a walnut is basically a bit of wood, because it tastes like wood, and it's come from a tree which is wood, but a tree is actually just like a bit of broccoli, which is vegetables, and we eat it, you think, wow, it looks physical to us, but if you break it down, that tree isn't any different to us. But if you look at a walnut, you see it's exactly the same as a brain. So saying how a tree might become a human one day, it's hard to fathom, but you can understand how it might be possible if we evolved from like a nut or a seed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, especially too with the idea that if you subscribe to the Big Bang Theory, everything started from some particle that was so infinitely small yet beyond infinitely dense, which is a concept alone. My mind is having a hard time balancing. Like, something that's so small we can't see it has the same volume and mass as everything. Okay, it's a tough one. I don't know how physics work. I've actually been getting into a lot of these philosophical conversations with physicists lately, talking about things like, so we still don't understand how the universe came to be, really, or what we're here to do, and how all this works. And then you start looking at things that we're talking about, these patterns and these sort of these ideas, these universal laws, that I'm like, well, it may not be the Matrix, but if it's not the Matrix, then why haven't we seen plants do, you know what I mean? Like, think of that movie, The Happening, where the plants all decide to revolt against us, and they use chemical pheromones to communicate with each other, and basically they come up with a pheromone that makes us kill ourselves, right? It was sort of like the plants are all like, humans are going to wipe us out. They're having this whole conversation just through pheromones in the air, and it's like, humans are going to wipe us out. What can we do? Well, they're susceptible to pheromones the same as we are. What if we come up with a toxin that drives them insane and makes them kill themselves, and it becomes like a virus and it starts spreading? And the movie was pretty poorly executed. It didn't receive a lot of accolades in the theatrical world. It was one of the movies that almost kind of kept M. Night Shyamalan as a laughable household name. But as poorly created a film as it is, I think the concept is worth thinking about. Life feeds off of life in a strange way, right? I mean, we eat vegetables, we eat things that had been alive, and our body magically breaks it down and turns that into proteins that it then uses to rebuild parts of our bodies that have aged out or need to be repaired. Why would that be? You know what I mean? That's like, why is that the case? And so, if that is, it means, I think ultimately it just keeps coming back to, we're all more connected. Everything is more connected than it might seem. And it's interesting that we kind of started out talking about how, humans sort of arrogantly assuming we're the top of the food chain just because we can talk to each other. We're not in much different a boat than every other living creature on this planet. So there's a lot of merit to noticing the differences, but then starting to look at how we're the same and figure out what's the greater implication there,
Yeah, people who say if you study animals, you learn more about humans. And that's not a coincidence. It's because we've evolved from like that level of intelligence from that animal to this. So, lots of people, they say, if you study animals, you will literally see and understand why humans do what they do. And I don't particularly believe in things of facts. I believe that a fact is something that no one else could find flaws in until someone finds a flaw. And it's any science, it's any food that's good or bad, anything at some point becomes factual or non-factual, which means, okay, it's like Bitcoin goes up now, it's going to go down and go up, so nothing stays the same. But I believe that the sun got too hot, splat out some molten, which is the earth, and it cooled on the outside and it's left warm on the inside. But because there's still like volcanoes underground still like on fire, that then is rising heat. And then when the earth is not facing the sun, that's cool, which creates moisture, and then the moisture stays in. And then with water, you just need some kind of gas or whatever, like a single cell organism. We don't know, like, for example, gases can create something, we don't know. And then the gas creates something with the water, which creates a physical thing like a little tiny mosquito. And then that kind of breeds, and then that mosquito becomes a fly, and then a bird, and then it becomes a duck and a chicken, and then a fucking, and goes an ape to a polar bear to an ape to a human. So yeah, I believe that is just very simply how we evolve, like condensation, heat on the inside, cold on the outside, moisture, water creates everything. Hence why whole world's made up pretty much of water. We're made pretty much of water, and there's so many fish out there. Like fish just dominates everything, really. You think what a fish is, just a swimming tadpole. Tadpoles are, a little mosquito before it becomes a mosquito, like, water that gets too warm and you get those little mosquitoes and they swim. Well, that's basically a fish, even though it's a flying mosquito. So a bird becomes a fish and the fish is a little mosquito. That's pretty much how I think the world began.
Cycle continues. And it's also the fact that if one element of that goes out of balance, it throws everything else, so if we lose the fish, or a lot of people talking about if we lose the algae, if we lose the things that are even harder for us to notice because they're not on the surface, one of those things, if we lose the bees, then plants will lose their ability to procreate, because bees pollinate and spread and keep the plant life going, and it's sort of like it's easy for us to miss these things, but once we see the result of one of them going away, it'll suddenly be a lot more obvious that we should have been paying more attention. But it keeps coming back to everything still being connected. You know what I mean? That like if one of those things goes, the whole, and the fact that Earth is the way it is. I remember this from astrology in college. It was sort of like when you were talking about like the molten state and everything was just kind of being spat out, and it kind of like landed where it landed and started rotating in the universal orbit. Where Earth is kind of like that perfect sweet spot where if it was any further away from the sun, it would be too cold. If it was any closer, it'd be too hot. We're like at that exact magic distance from our star for life to thrive the way it does, which would then start to imply things like other stars must have a planetoid or some kind of body around it that would be in that sweet spot also, where this could be happening. We could be having the same conversation in a different galaxy, and maybe the sunlight there is red instead of yellow. Superman can't fly there, but it's the fact that like there's all these similarities, that life is life, and that I think life will always, if it gets to this level of complex thought and complex concepts, it'll probably always wind up in something like what we're in. I would be surprised if, or wouldn't be surprised if we were able to create a virtual representation of us. I guess like a Matrix, if we were to be able to create our own version of the Matrix, but it was something that was completely, once we press the button, it's completely operates on its own. You know what I mean? It's almost like we just kick it in and we see what happens. What if we wind up observing that it creates the exact same scenario we're sitting through right now? If we let it go from the beginning, it's just, planets, it's just Earth and elements, and the next thing you know, we come back. There was this great short animated thing on Netflix called Love, Death, and Robots, and one of the short films in that collection is this couple, and they open their freezer in their new apartment, and there is basically a civilization in there, and it starts out in caveman era, and over the course of a day, this like miniature civilization goes beyond where we are. They go to like space age and nuclear, up to the point where they wind up like wiping themselves out and kind of like blowing themselves away into this nuclear explosion. And then the next day it starts over again. And I'm like, I wonder if if we're just one of those scenarios where one day in that couple's freezer in that new apartment, and what's the next day going to be like? And you know what I mean?
Yeah, like people say, is there life out there? So yes, you have to be at a certain distance from the sun where you're not too hot and not too cold in order to get that balance of heat. The rock solidifies, moisture, life. So if you're thinking that all life in terms of living bacteria growing needs let's say water and sun, then you think, okay, well, is there other planets that are the same distance? And we think, okay, if it was just slightly closer, would it be too hot that it would be that temperature would be unbalanced? And if it was just that little further away, would it be slightly too cold? If it was, say, at the same distance, give or take, closer or further away, would there be life on that planet? Okay, and the answer is technically yes, because yes, but then you've got to think, okay, well, when did the sun spit out that rock in order to solidify? Because it needs to cool down a certain amount of time in order for it to, for it to work how it does. But if you're thinking, okay, life doesn't have to necessarily mean oxygen, lungs, eyes and ears and nose and mouth, then there could be anything and anything out there, something that can work on just cold or work on just hot. So you think about Mars. Was there life on Mars? Well, let's just say that Mars was essentially Earth before Earth was Earth, millions of years ago.
Yeah.
And the circumstances were right where it's not too hot, not too cold, and then you've got the mosquitoes to become the fish, become the ape. It means that this cycle of life could have happened billions of years ago, and then we're just like a duplicate on another rock. Does it mean that we're tuning into their thoughts or from them doing it? You don't know, because we tune into other people's thoughts without even realizing. But then it's like, have we evolved further than they did? For example, the rock was slightly out of the sun, which means it cooled down quicker and then they died quicker. So they never got to this point of evolution. But yeah, again, who would say, can you live on Mars?
It would
That's the
be.
thing.
I
Like,
mean, it's clear that it's very similar, right? From what we've seen, like the surface and everything. It looks like it looks like something happened and changed the environment, but at one time, very, very possible what we're all going through, what we're all seeing around us was exactly the same there. So in some ways it's kind of cool to be able to recognize that, but in other ways it's a little scary too, because as much as it's a clue as to what's going on, it also is a little bit of a warning too. Like, hey, we don't want Earth to look like this at some point. I mean, if it does, we won't be around to see it. I don't imagine, but it is a little ominous. I think it's a little haunting out there.
do you know, for example, when you just like look around in the woods and you're looking at the trees, thinking, "Wow, that tree is growing," whatever, and then you kind of go into space and you look at it down, and then you look at the other planets. Can you like phantom looking up as that's life, or is life looking down and we're just on one of the rocks?
Oh wow. Um, So that plays with the idea of is our ego coming into play with where we start with that? You know what I mean? Like there's some people who think, well, I'm only thinking this because I've been granted this ability, so I must be looking down. You know what I mean? Whereas I think our natural inclination is to look up because that's where our light comes from. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's is there a single definition? You know what I mean? Or is life all of this? Is life everything from the planet that is now a rock that used to be us to maybe another planet out there that's far more advanced to the planet that's just coming into existence and is going to be the potential for when we're gone to be another version of us? But is life really all of that existing at the same time? Is life the existence of all these different states at once? There's a lot of theories going on right now that also kind of puts time in that same boat. Like the future, the past, and the present are all happening simultaneously. And that is time. Time isn't one point along that journey. Time is the fact that all of it is there and that we're only experiencing our part of it and we only experience it linearly. But if there were a way to experience it in a different way, we might see that it's really the entirety and not just our perspective point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so if you think about things, let's say you think of 5 things to do, you can go and do those 5 things right now, and that took you in terms of time, say 5 minutes. Or you can lay in your bed and watch Netflix and do that over 5 days, and that took 5 days worth of time. So time is essentially how quick you respond to thoughts. Because if you take away thoughts, you're just aware. And I now need to eat to grow and to keep growing, to survive, eat, drink, and mate. So time is simply just thoughts and how quickly you apply action to it. But think about how if there was life on Mars beforehand, right, and they died out because of the conditions, whatever, and then the next bit of bacteria grew on Earth because that floated towards the sun in the perfect space between it, and then we die out, and then we go back to Mars. Like that. Just think about it like that. How life came from Mars, or there was life on Mars. Then the next life came from the Earth, but then we go back to Mars as we changes and the climate changes, whatever, and then we go back to Mars. But it's like if humans hadn't built a spaceship, we simply would have just died out here. So then, in terms of the balance of the world, as you said, everything has a balance. Like the coral has a balance for the fish and the fish, whatever. If we go to Mars, are we going to change the balance of, say, the universe because we're now like creating too much heat on Mars, which is putting more heat into the universe, which affects Pluto and Uranus? And it's like
Yeah.
everything becomes very complicated when it's all in our head anyway. Like
Yeah.
none of this really exists apart from like imagine a floating dinosaur. You take a horse to space. Like what's the horse going to do up there? Like if you put a horse on Mars, what's it going to do? Like how does the horse species evolve on Mars? Like shit like that.
Yeah.
It's just like it's like fantasy, and then it becomes a reality, and then it becomes it's only a reality because we are thinking and evolving from those thoughts. But you take it all away, it was just a tree growing.
Yeah.
Man, it's
Well,
all
I mean,
fucking weird.
And it's funny too because you see a lot of things that when we were kids were just sort of conjecture. They were magic. They were things that Star Trek were like, oh yeah, we'll all be carrying around these little computers. We could talk into them. It gives us information back. And now, someone who is born today, by the time they're 6, will have their first smartphone, and they will never know an existence walking around without being able to get the answer instantly. Um, at their fingertips. They'll never know an age where they had to think more before they could get the information right there. But that at the time when we were kids was something we were told would never happen. Like our math teachers were always like, you have to know how to do this because it's not like you're gonna have a calculator with you all the time. Well, we have calculators with us all the time. And you wonder, would we have gone that route if we hadn't imagined that route first? You know what I mean? Like, would society look like a Star Trek episode if Star Trek never came out and painted a possibility of society looking this way? So it's kind of, there's as much a what would have happened if this didn't happen versus we always have the potential to make something more complicated and crazy than what we're presented with. And where is the happy medium? Which of those are we supposed to be doing? Should we be just kind of going with the flow of what's around us, or should we be constantly trying to affect and evolve and build out? And so, I guess it really depends on where you feel the sense of peace coming from, right? Like that's what everybody says. Ultimately, you find out the thing that makes you feel like you're at peace, and that's where you're supposed to be. So maybe the other thing is all of us are supposed to kind of come up with our own explanation of what life is, and then until you're given something that changes that for you, and you're just finding a way to make it all make sense from moment to moment and day to day.
If you look at like humans, we see how much we've evolved in say 50 years, right? And then when you die at 100, you look back at your 100 years, you think, wow, how much we evolved, right? But if you go back to the generation before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if everything has simply evolved and you've learned from the past, right? You build a skyscraper based on past knowledge of how to build a skyscraper. We look at our 100 years and think, wow, we evolved so much in terms of technology to technology to technology to technology, right? But if evolution is just, for example, a stick, stone, attach it to the rock, sharpen it, and then you evolve to the generation before us, that is evolution. That is the same as iPad to iPhone to TV to smartphone. So if everything is about evolution, we aren't the smartest we've ever been, and we're not the dumbest, because the generation beforehand, when they were going from caves to whatever, lighting a fire, they must have adapted too. But if you put all of that into perspective, they've evolved like 1,000 steps before they died. We've evolved 1,000 steps. You go back thousands of years, they evolved thousands of steps. Chimps, they evolved thousands of steps from, getting that coconut or finding a way to grab it and then going down. So if every time everything lives for 100 of years, and you go back and understand 100 years before, what were they doing, where they are now, there's hundreds of steps in that process, just like there's 100 of steps in our process. So we are not the smartest we've ever been. It's just when you think about what we've come from, those 100 steps, it seems smart. But if you go back in time and look at animals and how they've evolved and humans before, they're thinking the same thing. We have evolved. We are so smart compared to when I was 5, even though they had nothing.
Right.
They've gone from a house and logs, nothing, to a house and coal fire. That is evolution. So if everything is just about evolving, it's never going to stop evolving.
Right.
And there's no such thing as you know what I'm trying to say? There's no such thing as you're intelligent than you were before, because it's all based on perception of where you've come from, and everyone's come from a starting point.
Right. It's like context. Yeah, it's context. Like, so, like how they have found cave paintings, or they found stone, tablets, they found statues, they find all kinds of things that have, for the time that they were created, what looks to be technology they shouldn't have access to. And if you think, a lot of people, I love to think in science fiction terms always, because science fiction was always like, why isn't it like that? Why can't we imagine it being like that? So the idea is always, we're going to get to a point where we can travel through time, right? And if we ever got to the point where we could go to the past, what do you think it would look like? Like, even let's say right now, what if someone comes from 200 years in the future and they show up to us, and what if in the future humans are 2 feet taller than they are now? We would have no way of recognizing what we're looking at or understanding what we're looking at. And we would take pictures, we would do paintings, we do all kinds of things to represent it. But they would be looking at us as very primitive, even with all the stuff that we have, like the computers and the phones and all the technology and all the different sort of societal functions that we've created. They would still think of us as primitive, right? And it's because we don't have the context. They don't have the context of, for us, this is a huge leap in advancement from the caveman days, and whatever let them come back to the past, we can't even handle that. But we wouldn't know how to represent it either. So when we see all these things from the past, and it's just like a painting of a person flying on a chariot in the sky, what if that chariot in the sky is actually some kind of spaceship or time machine, and they didn't have the context for it? They just saw they're floating in the clouds, So context is kind of key. Context is, what gives us the ability to understand. And I think it's because we have this linear, existence. Our consciousness can't just like accept, without the context of, all right, that's how it was yesterday, this is how it is today, and tomorrow it'll be this. Without those three elements, we don't like stories like that. You ever notice that when a TV show gets canceled or a movie doesn't have a really solid ending, we kind of feel a little bit like what's going on? Like we're uncomfortable. We like the idea of closure at the end of the way we perceive the story to go, beginning, middle, end. We're always, though, existing in the middle of the story. The end is the day you die. The beginning we don't remember because being born is a hard thing for our brains to hold on to. But we're always in the middle of the movie. And I think that's something that is a hard thing to swallow, hard pill to swallow sometimes.
So for example, there's been pictures drawn on rocks from the Egyptian days or whatever of circular things, which we would see as a spaceship, right? But we don't know what was there back then, and you don't know, for example, those spaceships are deep underwater because obviously, like now, global warming, whatever, the cities are becoming underwater. Eventually, it will become proper like an ocean. And so, for example, a plane at Heathrow Airport right now would become equivalent to the bottom of the ocean, like the Titanic, for example. So we don't know if, for example, man created a version of a flight craft. It's under the ocean, or it was made from sand, so it's just like melted and gone back as sand.
Right.
But then at the same time, you go back then, you see how we are making planes. You're making planes in America. I'm making planes in England. Without planes, for example, and cars and boats and traveling, you don't know what humans are making over there. So for all you know, thousands of years ago in what's called Russia, that part of the land, they could be creating phones and iPads and planes and cars and trains. But you don't know what's happening in China. Like, for example, we think we're making smart TVs and everything in England and America. You look at China, they're fucking miles ahead of us. I'm like, holy shit, what the fuck? They're well ahead of us. So if we are surprised by, for example, the technology China's making, and we have access to China online, right? You think, well, if they are evolving at a different speed to us, if we didn't have TV and planes and cars many years ago, why can't somebody be making something in that part of the earth called Russia? And this person is making something that's a bit part of the earth called Pakistan. So there's quite a possibility that there could have been flying devices made based on vision and reality. And I wonder if they could fly something up. For example, right? What if that on that stone when they wrote a disc, right? And they thought, I wonder if we could make something that could be like that. And then from that idea, like a piece of paper and a sketch on a whiteboard, they created a flying thing. And then they went off to live on Mars. Hence, like we are trying to do, we're trying to live on Mars. And what if we made a spaceship that could live for hundreds of years up there, like a spaceship that they made could live for 100 years up there? Hence why people say they keep seeing circular discs. Or the alternative is that there is aliens and somebody's seen that circular thing and they've written it down. Or humans before that came up with a disc and they saw it, like we are coming up with a plane because we've seen a spaceship. Or, for example, they have seen a spaceship that someone on the other part of the earth, for example, China made, but where they are, which is equivalent to, say, America, they're like, what the fuck is that? That's like China making a 5G TV before we've made a 4G TV. And we're like, what's that thing China made? 5G? So you're on this part of the earth, you see this thing in the sky that another human has made all the way over there. But because you don't have TV online and planes and cars to see it, you think, wow, spaceship, what is that? Before you know, it's just an evolved human being making something that your tribe hasn't yet created. And then, for example, you see that, you create it yourself. Or we tune into the other thoughts of other humans on the planet, so they become our thoughts. For example, reincarnation, you believe that this person was your uncle or whatever because you're tuning into his thoughts. So when you look at it like that, you think, wow, spaceships might just be a past human's form of a flying craft, which is equivalent to our aeroplanes. And you know what I mean? Like different parts of the earth are doing stuff now that we have no idea. Like tribesmen, they're still living off honey and coconuts. You go to China compared to, say, Norway, or let's just say the Antarctic or Iceland, whatever. They just all live in their little village. They hunt fish and they've got snow and they speak. They have fire and wooden shacks. They don't know what a phone is or what a TV is. People in jail who've been there for 30 years, they don't know what an iPhone is. That's fucking crazy, but they don't know what it is. So different parts of evolution happen at different times. It's not all equal, even though everything's online and we think that everything's, because there's parts of, you know, like Syria, for example, they don't even know what TV is because they just live in, like, you know, shacks and stuff. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
just work that out right now.
Yeah, man, there is no universality to the human experience other than eating, sleeping, dying. You know, like those basics.
Fucking.
Yeah, that too. But we have, I mean, such a variety of possible experiences too. It's interesting when you line them all up and you almost say it's like total luck where you wind up living your life. You know, you don't choose, unless there is. That's the thing. It'd be crazy to find out that there was, like, you walked into an arcade, you chose a bunch of things, and we are living out that video game right now. And that when it's all over, you're like, oh wow, all right, that was a lot of fun. I keep coming back to the Matrix analogy, but yeah, man, it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild, but we're all still people at the same time.
But yeah, so if you list all the possibilities and you like start creating and imagining things that you don't already know, like how did life get here, whatever, you open up so many other doors. Like, I love it when I speak. I work stuff out as I speak, and then I have like new knowledge. And then next time I speak, whether it's on a podcast or to my parents, I now am speaking with this new knowledge. And then when I speak about that, I evolve a little bit more. For example, I never thought about the spaceship on the wall being something someone had seen, or did they just draw it and fantasize and then create it? Or did they see another human, for example, another part of the earth create it? I've never thought about it like that, which is fascinating, because if like, I'm imagining now, so why couldn't those humans imagine then? Like, I'm no different. Like, I'm thinking of a spaceship, so I create it, but can't it have been I saw it and then I created it? And it's just the same old cycle over and over again.
But the thought had to exist somewhere. You know what I mean? Our ability to have the potential for that thought was there. And so whether it was you seeing it or someone else drawing it and then someone else executing it, it's our ability to take it from concept to reality that is a universal also. Yeah, and it's going to be how much of that you're exposed to and how much you've seen go from being a drawing to a real thing that's going to let you realize, okay, because I think there's some people, like, if you're stuck in that zone where, yeah, I am in the tribe, but I keep imagining all of these other things, and while I'm out hunting, I kind of imagine what it would be like if there were things flying above us, and I'm never going to draw that, but then I see the things flying above us, and I'm like, oh, all right, I must not have been the only person thinking what it would be like to fly, and what it would be like to, be able to see further than I can see from where I'm standing with my stick and my bag of vegetables that I've been, harvesting. Yeah. It's weird, man. It's weird that all these things can exist on the same place. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Anything else you want to speak about before we wrap it up? Anything in specific, particular?
No, man. I mean, this was a lot of fun because we kind of jumped into it not knowing what we were going to talk about. And the next thing, this must be something that we've been thinking about for a while and has just been kind of below the surface, you know. It's funny. I love getting into conversations like this. So thank you very much for the opportunity and for making it happen, man. It's a lot of fun.
Anything you want to plug or anything? Websites, podcasts, social media links?
The Hollow Nine Network, where the word hollow, the number nine, INE.com. We're a podcast network. We're sort of in a rebuilding phase right now, but we still have a whole bunch of shows. We go to comic cons and film festivals, and we interview filmmakers and celebrities and artists and creative people. We do our own original creative content. We've got a lot of stuff going on, so just keep your eyes and ears glued over there at hollow9.com, and you can feel free to reach out to us, join in, be a part of the action the way Ollie's doing right now. So, or we kind of got that mutual thing going on. I'm a part of his universe now. He's part of ours. And so that's kind of how podcasting works. It's very much a more the merrier DIY kind of thing. But yeah, so just check us out over there.
The Bald Head Society.
Yeah, there you go, man. Well, that's what they say, right? We're evolving that way. We all started out like chimps covered in hair, and now it's like the less hair you have, the more advanced you are.
Okay, I'm going to press stop, and I'm going to say goodbye about the end, right? One sec, right there.